Um, so good evening. I hope your week is going well. Today, we're going to jump into prompt engineering, and we'll talk about a framework or an approach that is described in the book. And then we will have probably an hour, hour and a half for the second half to actually get going on the assignment. And so the assignment number three, who is Hormuz, relates to the Strait of Hormuz. And if you have been following the news with the US-Iranian conflict, the Strait of Hormuz is very, very important. Now, I didn't know completely that how important it was and why it's important, but what I wanted to do is use Copilot as an opportunity for you to learn how to structure your interactions with Copilot to try to get the type of information out of it that's useful that you need. And so I have some examples of that. And it's not really about your opinion about, everything dealing with the US-Iranian conflict. It's more so about using Copilot to get information out of it and how you prompt it. You can have it adopt a viewpoint, whether they're for something, against something, neutral, and so forth. You can also input information in it, but what's really important, the one takeaway I hope that you get from today, got to get closer to the microphone, that you get from today is that there's nothing magic about these AI models. Also, these AI models, because they input such a vast amount of information, it's really important to appropriately guide it to one part of the model versus the other. Because if you leave it up to itself, many times it's going to get it wrong. Because is very good about recognizing patterns between things, but it's really bad about trying to guess a person's intentions. It's not really thinking. It's just searching and looking at patterns. Okay. So administratively, the reading, book two and book three, is for stuff we're going to talk about next week. But what's live now, due a week from today, um, at midnight, it's really 12:01 the next day, is who is Hormuz and how did we get here? And the goal of the assignment, and I have some exercises at the end, is to practice using the prompting structure that's recommended by the book and discussed in the book. Okay. Any questions? No? All right. So the dad joke of the day. Why don't oysters ever give to charity? Because they're selfish. Yes, because they're shellfish. Okay. There's I can never say shelf. Sel there's shellfish. I can't say that. Shellfish. All right. Because they're shellfish. Okay. All right. So last time when we met, we talked about probabilities and we talked about this idea of the universe of consideration. And we gave an example of what all of the different outcomes might be for rolling the die. And we had a prescription of sorts for how you compute the probability. Any sort of follow-up questions about that? No follow-up questions? No? Going once, going twice? Okay, we'll continue. And so one of the things we mentioned, we gave some example text, and yeah, it's just a small amount of text. This is nowhere near the tens of trillions of documents that something like ChatGPT and therefore Copilot might ingest. But one of the things that these large language models, these AI models use in terms of probability is the following. We have a vocabulary set of words, and we score an entry every time we see one word following another. And so if we said dog ran, you'll notice there's a one here. And so if we do this for a large number of documents for words that follow one step away, two steps away, three steps away, we can encode lots of patterns about how language, how text, how images and things proceed from lots and lots of data sources. And because language is not random, meaning some arbitrary word doesn't just follow another word, it has structure. And because of that, you can make it look like it understands, but really it's just recognizing a lot of patterns from a massive, unimaginable amount of data. Now, this probability table is so big that it's scattered across hundreds of thousands of computers in multiple data centers. And so in reality, you have tens of trillions of documents. That's a million millions. That's a lot of documents of various sorts that are scraped or obtained from the internet and other sources. They won't tell you in truth where they're getting all of their data, right? Because that's their competitive advantage. But the vocabulary is in the hundreds of thousands. It's not out of the ordinary to have 500,000 different words. I can't even think of 500,000 different words. But if you had 500,000 different words and 20 trillion documents, yeah, you can get pretty good about depicting different word combinations and how they follow one another. And so then you take your language model and this thing in the middle here, a neural network, it constructs different patterns. In fact, it takes those follows relationships and looks at follows relationships at different number of skips of words away in sentences. And then it allows you, if you type some text, it consults part of that probability table relevant to that text you type in, and then it completes it, or it can write a story by just generating words that should follow. And that's really all it's doing. But the problem is, it goes back to this picture, is that this probability table is so big, when you want good answers, you have to direct the model to certain parts of this big probability, or else you'll get bad outputs out of it. And so the whole goal of a prompt more formally is the text that you type into Copilot. You say, tell me about this, describe that. And when you type that text, that model, this large thing, it's much larger than I'm making it look, it focuses in on parts of it that has something to do with what you typed. Because what you typed is words following one another, one word away, two words away, 10 words away. And somewhere buried inside of this large probability table, enormous probability table, is some pattern that matches what you've typed in, right? And so the prompt is the text that you input, and the response that it gives you is called a completion. The reason historically why it's called a completion was in the earlier days of large language models, which isn't that long ago. It's like between 5 and maybe 7 years ago. Um, its original purpose was to complete sentences for you, complete entire sentences. But that's gotten a lot more sophisticated, both in terms of the amount of data that they've input, as well as the type of data. And I have some examples about that in the subsequent slides. All right, any questions? No questions? No? All right. And so prompt engineering talks about how do you best format and structure your interactions with a large language model. And so why is this important? Why do you think? Can I just say, tell me about dogs? There's a lot of information about dogs, right? So if you don't structure it appropriately, you're not going to get the right output. So in the case of dogs, if you said, tell me about dogs, maybe you want to know about dogs that are really good with children that are between 5 and 7 years old. They like to pull, they like to poke. Or maybe tell me about dogs if I don't have a lot of space. And maybe it's an apartment and I don't have a yard or anything like that. Or tell me about dogs for somebody who might like to walk 3 miles a day, a dog that's high energy. Or tell me about dogs that are more couch potatoes based on a certain lifestyle. And so if you just said generally, tell me about dogs, that might correspond to a huge part of this large language model. And now the algorithms are left with just picking something. And when it just picks something, dogs, it's a large category of dogs. And invariably, it's not going to get it right. It's going to say something that has nothing to do with what your specific case is. So when you talk about structuring your interaction, what's really important is to provide the right amount of context, information in a narrative form. You talk about stuff because each time you talk about stuff, that's getting more and more specific, you're helping this language model to focus in on a smaller and smaller portion of this big probability table. And then you're helping it make appropriate selections for what it is that you're trying to say. And so you'd say, it gave a really good output. Now, how you structure it could be one shot, you just specify everything. but it's really hard to go into great detail for something, right? Just this morning after class, a student asked me about a homework problem. And he said, I don't know why this thing is doing the following. And first of all, I was like, what are you talking about? I didn't know because it was very specific. But if he had said, I have a question about the homework. Well, what about the homework? Question two. What about question two? I don't understand what this means in the code. You start general, provide context because it's hard to focus in on the detail. So it's absolutely okay to start general, and through a series of interactions, you give it a prompt, it gives you a completion, you follow up with more specifics, and then it gives you an answer. Sometimes you can redirect it if it focuses in on the wrong part of the model. Other times you just provide more detail so it can get better and better and better in giving you output that's specific to what it is you're trying to do. Does that make sense, Mario?
A roadblock where you're not getting what you're asking it to do.
Ah,
Is that a newcomer?
then you can either correct it and say, this is what I'm talking about. You can provide more information, or you can just start anew if you choose to, because it only can focus in on what you give it, right? Well, you say, why did it say that? You said, well, you never told me to, right? And it really is like that. There's not a lot of thinking that goes on inside of these models. They just appear that way just because it's such a tremendous amount of information. I can't even imagine 20 trillion documents or 20 trillion of anything, that it's going to get enough examples of words that whatever you input it, it's going to have something that matches what you're saying. That makes sense? Any questions? Yes.
Trying to look something, we use the AI, I think it was Google,
Mhm.
and it says, wait, as I search the internet, so is it like searching for keynotes?
I went and said, wait.
Like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, say it's
Yes.
search.
Yes.
Was it looking for like the exact like, for whatever, like an article or just matching up words?
When you do like a Google search, it's it's a different thing from just like Copilot. It's uh it's called what's it called? RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And so when you do a web search is something different from the AI model. And when you do the search, when you Mhm. Yes, but a Google search is something different from AI. The Google search is using AI to give you explanations of stuff based on the probability table it has constructed. With a Google search, and this is not the subject of the course, but they have a representation for all of the web pages in the world. And when you type in something for the web page, it brings up a list of things that match. Now, given that list of things that match, it's saying, okay, now send them to Google Gemini so that it can give a summary or give some other explanation rather than just giving you a list of documents that have information about what it is you're trying to do.
I would come right up.
Yes, but the AI product and the web search are two different products. The web search is using AI to assist in providing summaries for what it is you find as a result of search. And so that's a great question. I can show you an example. Mhm, mhm.
Whatever history
Yes.
is on it, but when you do AI, it's like, what is it, matching up words?
It's taking all of the results of the search and it's sending them to the AI model that Google has called Gemini. And it's providing you summaries and explanations based on all those documents. Because if you did a Google search for golden retrievers,
Yeah.
it's going to bring up hundreds of pages about golden retrievers. Most people don't have time to read through that, right? So then you send it to Gemini and you tell Gemini, give me a summary of all these documents. Now that summary is what Gemini is doing. So it's using the AI model to augment the results of search. Yes?
That does it automatically though.
Yes, because that's how
Not
they've.
like you take the summary and send it to Gemini, it just does it automatically.
Yes, because they've chosen to add value to their search by using AI. And in fact, on Google, you don't have to use AI search. You can just do a regular web search. But when you use the AI search, it's using their AI model to provide summaries of those responses to the web search. Now, you could just take a web search and take every link, send it to the AI model, and say, produce a summary for me. and it would give you something similar. But Google is choosing, and many of the search engines are starting to do that, of using the AI model as an assistant to help you. Like some, for example, email programs, right? Microsoft Outlook does this. It'll run Copilot on your email inbox. And when you get a message, it'll provide you a summary of all of the back and forth emails you've exchanged, right? And so email is a different program from the AI model, but they're using the AI model to help with providing summaries. And Gemini is doing the same thing. Hmm. Hmm.
It's like your whole list, but now
Mhm.
when you ask it a question.
Yes.
It comes with AI, but then it will say, I'm searching, and then it will give us whatever information.
Yes.
Then it says, do you want more information?
Mhm. And so when it's searching, remember, when you have these results from the web search, you then have to present it to the AI model. So you give it a bunch of links to stuff. Now you have to give it the opportunity to search the hundreds of thousands of computers in the dozens of data centers to find that part of this enormous model. Now, I'm just drawing a box here, but for Google Gemini, this thing straddles maybe, you know, 40 data centers, each one with like 200, 300,000 computers in it. It takes a lot of work to do that, but you get it in seconds. I'm sorry?
Google.
When you're using Gemini, the Google search, that takes a lot of time as well. But the Google search is a lot faster than using Gemini because you're not consulting this enormous probability table scattered around hundreds of thousands of machines. Google has implemented AI assisted search as providing summaries for you. And then when you say explore deeper, it's giving you more explanation.
Compared to Copilot, so
Copilot is a different company's product. Gemini is Google's, and Copilot is Microsoft. Well, Copilot is really ChatGPT underneath the covers. But Microsoft, you can use Edge, Microsoft browser, and do an AI assisted search. So it's not unique to Google. It's just their competitive advantage to help you manage your queries when you're searching for stuff. Because it's kind of nice to get an explanation of things instead of just seeing 2 dozen documents that you have to read through yourself.
both of them structures, are they basically when they create those, are those algorithms?
Yeah, it's an algorithm that says this is how I um, return links to documents that have something to do with what you're searching for. And then it says, let me pass this to Gemini, and Gemini is going to do a summary
Each company is creating algorithms to.
that match the search with the AI summaries. And it's not just for search. People are using AI summaries for email, Slack. You can buy an extra feature where it'll provide summaries of what's the discussions in Slack. People are using AI to do all sorts of things, and they're just choosing to use it, what's called retrieval augmented generation. So it's a companion to the web search. And again, if you go to any web property and do web search, you don't have to do the AI search. There's an option to just do the regular web search. And so you could certainly bring up Copilot, take each, the top 20 links presented to you, and then say, here are the 20 links, summarize this for me, right? So it's just kind of automating that process because they feel it adds value when you're trying to manage and get information. Okay. Any other questions? No? Great, great. So you want to get the most effective usage. And so there are instructions that you can give this large language model. I want you to create a list that describes the benefits for young children for golden retrievers versus American Pit Bull Terrier, for example. There are examples you can give it. You give it lots of examples of things, documents about a topic, and then you ask it a question, right? There are user input. You can just have a conversation, and that conversation, the topic, as that topic changes, it's searching and referring to different parts of his model that is appropriate or has something to do with your topic of discussion. So there are different ways of interacting with this, but the name of the game with prompt engineering, keeping in mind this massive probability table, is trying to get it to focus on that part of the model that's most appropriate for what it is you're trying to get out of it. Does that make sense? And so you can have different types of input. Now, plain vanilla Copilot might or might not support all of them, but there are options and there are AI technologies that will take each of these as inputs. So you can input text when you're typing. That text could be something you type on your computer, or it could be something from a document, you upload it, or you can give it a web link and it'll go take that text from that website, ingest it, and use that. Mario?
For example, I was doing a annotated
Mhm.
bibliography and it did that.
Mhm.
For me. So I'm
Mhm.
just putting things together.
And it's very good at processing data too,
It is.
right? Which is very
I
nice.
gave it link and it had everything in that link. It's to that link. So I
Mhm.
think the different parts of the website.
Mhm.
It might or might not read it.
Yes.
So yeah, be careful.
Yes. You can also give it audio, sound files. Now, if it doesn't support sound files, maybe there's an option that you can access for it to process sound files, but they're doing this now.
That one. Like, how do you
You would, I'll ask all of you, right? That's a great question. Um, Give me just like 3 to 5 minutes and we'll get to
yeah.
that. Okay. You can also give it images, pictures, like you saw when I, took my picture and cleaned it up and got a suit and all that stuff and a beard. You can give it video, right? Now, these different data types are different sizes. Text is relatively small. Audio is a little bit bigger. Imagery, pictures is bigger, and video is really, really big, right? And so if you think about a video, that's a picture 30 times a second. That's a lot of data. And so these different models, you can input them and they'll look at that idea of relationships between things in text, in audio, imagery, and video. And so before we get to Mario's question, so we have different outputs. And these outputs can also be text. You type in a text, tell me about dogs, it gives you back text. You could also have audio outputs, right? It'll output sounds. I've done that before. You can have it output images, which you saw, right? I input an image, I described what I wanted, and it modified that image and it output an image as a result. You can also have it output video. Absolutely. Now, of course, it requires more computers as the data gets bigger and the relationships in that data gets more complex. So, of course, um, we all find that this is useful. You input text and you output text. So let me ask you, how is it useful? How can it be useful if you input audio and you output text? So what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Input audio, sound, and you output text. Yes.
You can summarize what's going to say.
You can summarize what's being said. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Yes.
Basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
Basically the same. You can say it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's gonna pop up on it.
Mm-hmm. How about captions? Yes. Uh-huh.
Maybe you can even like take the audio,
Mhm.
like, oh, could you put it in text in a more like brand way,
Mhm.
or like change the way in which what you're being said.
Mhm. So captioning, right? Maybe somebody has trouble hearing. Yes.
uh, Doing audio to somebody that need it. Like I have friends that are deaf, so
Mhm.
they can't hear, but if I speak it in, then it could translate. That's what they have on their phones.
Yes. Yes. And they have it on TV shows now as well. And I also have captioning on the videos that I post. You can just click that button, close captioning. Now, I didn't generate that. That is the audio being translated to text, and it's doing it as it happens as the audio track from the videos is playing. So what about input images and output text? How might that be useful? What do you think? Any thoughts on that? What's describing the image? And that's useful for a whole variety of situations. Hmm.
Take a picture with my phone
Yes.
and then describe to me what this is. It
Mhm.
might be a flower, it
Mhm.
might be a certain type of color, a certain type of texture.
Hmm. Like you might not know the name of something. And we had this beetle in the yard. I don't know what the hell is that. Took a picture and then it was describing what this beetle was. I thought it was some thing from, not supposed to be here, right? But apparently it's native to this region. Okay. What about video and output text? Is that useful?
In the from deaf people, that's how
Mhm.
watch movies.
Mm-hmm. And so a video is just a sequence of images, one after the other after the other. So absolutely, that's very useful. So what about other types of things? What about if I input text and output video? Is that useful? Could that be useful?
Yeah, like this Harry Potter trend right now on Instagram.
Mhm.
They're turning Hogwarts into drip works.
Okay.
I guess someone typed in
Hmm.
the archetype of Harry Potter as like
Hmm.
modern, luxury brand.
Hmm.
There's just been a trend of that, and I'm guessing that someone must have typed that up,
Hmm.
and just AI just ran with it.
So you imagine how specific your description has to be if you're using text and it's trying to make video based on the text you describe. So when you have somebody who creates movies, right? You have to create the scene. We have a room, this type of lighting. This is the mood. This is the interaction between the characters. This is how they look. There's a lot of description that goes into video, but absolutely, you could use it to mock up a concept for something that you want to create.
So before setting up and built it.
Yes. Yes.
Or SORA.
It was OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, their video creation platform. I had a student who used, yeah, they just axed it. Yeah, they're all about money. Um, but I had a student who was using ChatGPT in a system to create storyboards for ideas for short films. And so with a storyboard, you have a bunch of pictures that describe some storyline. And it's not a video, but it's just when you're trying to form or put together the concept for something which ultimately will become a movie, right? So there's all sorts of useful things, but the main takeaway that I'm trying to articulate for this particular slide is that you can have many different types of input and many different types of output. Now, will all language models support it? For the most part, yes, but some of them might want you to pay special fee to use certain features, only because especially as you go bigger in the size for each of these data types, it's going to take more resources. It's going to take more computers, more storage, more computation, and that costs money, right? And so they make sure that they monetize it. And you'll find in some of these AI models, yeah, you can produce video from text, but they might want to charge you for that because it takes more resources and they can, right? That's the other reason. Okay. Any questions? No? No questions. All right. So how to get good outputs? That's the key thing. And so good prompts are phrases, examples, user inputs that shape the behavior of the large language model. And when I say shape the behavior, what I refer to is focusing in on a specific part of that big probability table that's encoded and scattered across hundreds of thousands of machines and dozens of data centers. Now, when you want to shape the behavior, you need to tell it about the subject that you're talking about. Now, when you talk about a subject, tell me about dogs, that's a really big topic. There are lots of different types of dogs. But when you get more and more specific about the dog, now you're getting it to shrink down further and further and further so it can say a lot more about this specific thing. And so, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I've been hearing it a lot, but I don't know the distinction between the two. What is can they say agentic or agentic AI?
Oh, agentic AI is using these large language models through programs, through coding, in order to get applications to make use of it. And so, for example, trying to think of something off the top of my head. Let's say you wanted to write an application, right? And you get some video, right? And you have a phone, and then you want someone to take a shot, a basketball shot, right? You take that video, and then you put it into AI, and that AI looks at a whole lot of game film. and it looks at Steph Curry. It looks at all Kobe Bryant. It looks at all sorts of people who were known to be good, perimeter shooters in basketball. And then it might make recommendations. Well, you need to follow through more. Your arc needs to be higher. You need to move backwards. You need to put more momentum into it. And so, how you do that, you'd have a program that takes the video, and then your program would use the programmatic aspect of these AI models, send it data, and interact through it program to program in order to use this large language model to do the analyses. It gets the result, and then it presents it to you in a consistent fashion. And so, this idea of agentic AI, an agent is a program that acts almost like a robot, right? It runs in an environment, it takes input, it thinks, but its thinking is offloaded to the large language model, to the AI, and then it gets back that result and then presents it to you in an appropriate way. And so the agentic part is just the implementation of programs. And it's also kind of catchy, right? You have to get a different name to sell the idea. But it's really just a program that makes use of the large language model to do the thinking on behalf of the application. And so you could have an agentic Microsoft Excel, right? And it takes data. And then if you want to do something to the data, you would describe what you want to do to the data, send it to the AI model. It gives you back the result, and Excel just draws a picture for you. Oh, it graphed it, right? And so all it is just a new term, and they use a lot of buzzwords all the time for implementing a program that uses the AI model to do this processing and thinking on its behalf. Okay. Right. It's really hot right now, right? There's a lot of,
We call it AI.
well, the agent, well, I mean, that's just the large language models. Some people call it LLMs, call it generative AI. But the agentic part is just the programmatic use of the large language model. There's no specific way that people do it now. It's sort of, you know, um, chaotic. Everyone's trying to define this is the way you do it. But right now is really the early days of what the quote unquote appropriate way of doing it is. Right. So, but I do know that there's a lot of monetization in agentic applications. A lot of organizations are are implementing those sort of things. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, I have a general question.
Mhm.
I remember when, back on when, calculators came.
Mhm.
And they were fascinated with it, and then the scientific calculators came, and those were specific.
Yes.
Then we started hearing about the computer, and it goes beyond a little bit. It seems to me we are, I'm looking at math as a universal language,
Mhm.
and you're familiar with this, the theory of everything.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm looking at the English language,
Mhm.
which is the biggest, which is the modern language that has a whole lot of, where it keeps adding on and keeps adding on.
Yeah.
And as you're describing to me the complexities of, you have to be specific.
Yes.
And you have this English language which is all over the place.
Yes.
It seems to me we are in the phase where we are trying to come together to marry everything, in which we should go to that theory of everything.
Mhm.
I'm comparing the theory of everything to a system we have in culture in Zulu called
Mhm.
the IFA model,
Mhm.
which is basically the theory of everything, where
Mhm.
the car is where you can explain every
Yeah.
action and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
It seems to me, and the way right now, a whole lot of all these companies are looking for data centers, which is a whole lot of waste, and they talk about waste of they use energy,
Mhm.
a whole lot of energy.
Yes.
And here we are, it could be just a simple prompt,
Mhm.
but you have to add all this to arrive at this simple thing,
Yes.
which goes up. So,
Yeah. Well, if you think about a single computer in a data center that uses about 1,200 watts of power, so imagine twice a window air conditioner for every computer. So if you have 100,000 computers, that's like 200,000 window air conditioners. That's a lot of power, right? But one of the difficulties when you specify things in text, text are so-called symbols, right? But for every symbol, you have what's called a symbol grounding problem. If I say the word dog, right,
Yeah.
to each of us, that might mean a different color dog, a different size dog, a shaggy dog, a dog with short hair. It has different meaning based on this word. And so part of the problem is that when you have text, wrapped up in that text is shared experience, right? So if I said spicy, how do you describe spicy? Spicy is just a word, but you describe the smell of the peppers, the tingling, the heat, right? How do you describe with words something that you experience through your senses? That's really, really hard. And part of the problem with this specificity is that you have to use a lot of words to describe a concept that the large language model has zero shared experience with you on, right? And that's what makes this hard. Because when you have these 20 trillion documents, you have a lot of examples of words, but there's no shared experience, no shared context. And so when you think about this idea in human civilizations, human groups called culture, you have these words have meaning, which are wrapped up with our physical experience in interacting in the world with one another, with things. And that's what makes it really hard when you have these descriptions. Because just saying dog, just saying spicy, right? Spicy food, it means something different to each of us. My spicy food might be more heat than what you're used to, or maybe vice versa, or somewhere in between. It might be a particular meal, right? For example. And so that's what makes this hard is that there's not a good way to link physical experience with these words, because at the end of the day, it's words, video, pictures, but there's no notion of experiences. And it's the grounding, the semantic or the behavioral meaning is really what makes words work. And we all have a different interpretation of what that physical experience is that backs up these words. So that's what makes it hard because the language model only knows the data that you input. That's all it can know, right? So you have to use a lot of words to tell it, okay, focus on this part, focus on that part, but not this half of this part, right? So you have to kind of engage in this back and forth dance, like two boxers kind of feeling each other out in order to converge on just those pieces that are needed to get the outputs out of it that you want. Does that make sense? So it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, there's a phenomenon at time
Mhm.
on existence or happening in which monkeys on a remote island, they no
Mhm.
contact with no contact with other monkeys,
Mhm.
learn a new skill, and then after a while, you observe that all other monkeys learn that skill
Yes, they teach the one another.
without contact.
Mhm.
They didn't contact. These are like monkeys didn't have, and it was a phenomenon that exists.
Mhm.
Um, when I entered Cross right now in DeepSeek, it didn't know.
Mhm.
So I took it from cloud and put it there, and now
Mhm.
it knows.
Mhm.
I'm thinking at what time, or is there a situation in which it's like that, in which something new comes out,
Mhm.
and then after a time, all the AI models know.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, believe you me, they're not just statically running this AI model. They're always going out and ingesting new data. Some of that data might be things that people prompt it with or upload it with. Other might be looking at Wikipedia, looking at Reddit, looking at all the places that people put data. So it's not a static thing. They're regularly ingesting new data to further improve these models. And that data can come from many places, but they'll never tell you where they're getting that data because they consider it their competitive advantage. So I don't really know where the data all comes from. There's some guesses about where it comes from, but yeah, it's not static. Just like as a human being, right? As you go from birth to your latter years, you're always inputting data, learning new things, right? And it might be, and when I say learning new things, I don't necessarily mean book knowledge, right? I mean just life experience, right? And so the same thing with these models, they're always ingesting new data. It's not static, it's not remaining fixed. Okay. But I just don't know what all the data is. And you could ask a large language model, what data was used to train your models, and it won't tell you, right? You could try.
One of the so-called students of modern computing
Mhm.
said the same thing. After a time, they don't know how and where some of the information is coming from. As the AI is fast learning.
Yes. Because they don't control what people upload and input. They don't have any control over that. People might be taking their private photos. When I say private, I don't mean that they shouldn't be shared. What I mean is that I take a photo of something in my experience and I upload it to ChatGPT. They don't know that I did that, right? But the model knows, and the model uses that, and it's always updating its probability tables. All right. So it guides its creativity, defines the boundaries of its response. And so one of the approaches advocated in the book is something called the Croft C framework. And so each one of these letters in Croft C stands for a particular thing. The C, the first C, stands for context. When you provide context, you're giving the model the background needed to understand the details of your request. And so you could also say, for example, I want you to pretend that you're giving this information for a child versus for an expert, right? So you could take the same request and you could make it sound like, what is gravity? Gravity makes things fall to the ground. That's what a child would get. Or somebody who's an expert, then you'd talk about what physicists talk about, right? And so you can take the same topic but get a dramatically different output from it by setting this idea of context or background. And so with the assignment, you're going to be talking about the Strait of Hormuz. And one of the things of how you guide the AI model to refer to one part of its probability table versus another is by providing it context. And so if I just said, tell me about dogs, there's a whole lot of stuff about dogs. I didn't provide sufficient context. If I said, I'm thinking about getting a dog, but I'm concerned about how that dog will interact with young children. The children are between 4 and 7. What dogs are really good and mellow with children and will take, to be honest with you, some of the abuse that children will put a dog through. To children, a dog is like a living teddy bear. So they're going to pull it, they're going to grab it, they're going to poke it. What dog is good for that age group? Okay. So now you've provided a lot more context. So instead of saying dogs, it'll say dogs that are known to be good with children, for example. And so this context, it gives it background. And so it causes this model to focus on a smaller part of the large language model so that you can eventually hone in on something that is appropriate for what type of output you want to get from it. The other is the role or the persona. A persona you can think of as adopting or assuming a personality, who you want to be, and that guides the tone or the style. So, for example, for the Strait of Hormuz, you could say, I want you to produce an answer that somebody who is quote unquote conservative might say, or someone who's quote unquote more liberal might say, or someone who's right in the middle might say, or someone who's a libertarian might say, or someone who's an anarchist might say. When you set the role, you're focusing in on a different aspect of the probability table for the large language model that is consistent with what that person might say. So it's almost like saying, put on a costume, become an actor, and act like this type of person. And that's going to give you, for the same type of information you want, a dramatically different style and tone. Maybe it should be somebody who's very agreeable or someone who's very adversarial. They're always going to kind of be argumentative, trying to disprove what you say. So imagine if you were an online blogger and you didn't use your real name, right? You could have two different blogs from two different persona using large language models and have audiences on both sides of whatever issue you might have. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying you could do it, right? And this persona is really important to help shape the types of responses. So then there's the objective. Now, with the objective, you really need to tell it what it is you want out of it. Because when you tell it what you want out of it, you're helping it to do what it is you're trying to accomplish. So if you said write an email, okay, it'll write you an email. It'll say hello and have the contents. But if you said, all right, draft a follow-up to this person about last week's proposal. Ah, okay, that's more specific. So when you outline and define for it in your interaction what it is you want out of it, if you don't tell it, it's just going to pick whatever from that large set of things it could pick. But the moment you say, this is what I want out of it, I want you to have a summary, and the summary should be a list, bulleted list, but I don't want too much information, no more than a few sentences. Aha. Now it says, okay, well, I'm not going to write 10 paragraphs for you. I'm going to have these lists that are very short summaries. So be specific about what it is you want to get out of it. And then the form, right? Should it be paragraphs? Should it be lists? Should it be bullets? Should it be a poem? Should it be all sorts of stuff? You want to say what you want out of it, but then in what format specifically, right? That saves you a lot of time. You don't have to follow up as much with the responses, and it also saves you to edit it. If you didn't say it and it chose paragraphs, then you have to go and take all this text and format it yourself and do all this work. But if you establish and invest in telling it more specifically what it is you want and the structure of what you want, then it'll be better in looking at what specific parts of this probability table are appropriate for what it is you're trying to get out of it. So that's just to say be specific. And then T in Croft C is tone. That's the attitude. You could have it very enthusiastic, very formal, right? Very polite and formal. You could have it empathetic. Oh, well, I know that's really messed up. You could change the impact, but you have to specify the tone. You tell it, I want you to write this response as if it was you know, a breathless, you ever see these programs? Late breaking news, we have, and you kind of, it like makes you excited when you hear it. Or like NPR, National Public Radio, yesterday there was a conflict in the Middle East. And it just kind of is more mellow, easing you into it. By specifying the tone, you can control the attitude in the text or the output that the AI generates for you. And that can change the impact depending on the audience that you intend this thing for. Does that make sense? Any questions? No? All right. And then the conditions. The conditions might be some rules or limits. If you're going to talk about the subject, because the audience, don't mention, and I just learned this, the Shia versus the Sunni Muslims, because in some parts of the world, you can't mention those two because you might offend somebody and they're never going to look at your article. For example, you could tell it how many words to use. Don't use this jargon because the audience I'm talking to, they're novice in this topic. And if I use jargon for this discipline, if I say a miter joint, they're not going to understand. Two pieces of wood that come together at this angle, right? Ah, okay. So you can set conditions or rules that will further shape or control how this thing outputs responses for you. And so thinking of these things, it's not easy. You have to really think about it. And, if you don't get the output that you want, you can absolutely change how you're inputting your prompt to it. And so it's this dance again. You're going back and forth, interacting with it, trying to shape the output that it gives you. So AI really has no understanding about what you're talking about. It does not. And anyone who's sort of a scientist that deals with the underlying models that these things build, they will never say he or she. They'll never say think. They'll say it, and they'll say pattern recognition. It's really good at recognizing patterns of all types that none of us would have ever thought about. It doesn't understand sarcasm. If you make kind of a statement like, the sky's the limit, right? Or some phrase like that. It doesn't understand that. It takes you literally for everything you say because all it knows is the words that you have. It doesn't understand hints at all. It takes what you say literally because it's really looking for everything you input. What patterns do I have and how does it match what I have in my huge, enormous probability table? But they do understand predictions and they understand patterns very well, be that patterns in text, patterns in images, patterns in videos, patterns in audio. Any questions?
No, I got a comment though.
Mhm.
It sounds like you describing data from Star Trek.
Mhm.
It was like a machine running knowledge and
Yes.
information, so they couldn't understand the simple.
Mhm. And it's imperfect. It doesn't understand spicy. Everyone knows spicy. We have shared understanding. It might mean a little bit different for one person to the next, but there's a lot of meaning in words that you can't capture with just sequence of words. So it has all the knowledge of the world, but it can't do some very simple things.
So if you ask AI about spicy, it might think you asking for a movie or something.
Yes, yes. Or you say, what does warm feel like? We should try that, right? So, oh, it's a heat, blah, 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 and the molecules jiggling around and energy and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't know what warm feels like. It can't, right? How do you describe warm? I don't know how to. Yes.
The word is like subjective.
Mhm.
That's why I have a problem trying to figure it out.
Yes. Because it could have 100 meanings for that subjective term. Which one it picks, it might just randomly pick one, or whatever happens to be closest to what it thinks you're saying. Um, in the future, I think it can be improved, but I don't think it can be completely fixed. I don't think it can be. Because just like saying it's kind of warm, even for each of us, warm might be a different temperature, right? But we all know what warm means and cold means. We have that shared experience because we live in the world. But I can't even describe in text what does warm
And
feel
it's
like.
also an attitude, like
Mhm.
you treat me right, I
Mhm.
think that you treat me warmly.
Yes. And we say a warm contact versus a cold contact. If you're in sales, a warm contact, you have some relationship already when you contact. A warm welcome, absolutely. And so, it's hard to, when you have subjectivity, you make an excellent point. How do you fill in the definition? Because that subjectivity differs depending on the experience. And the only experience it has is the words you input and the 20 trillion documents that it has ingested. So it's a hard problem. Will it get improved? Absolutely. Will it get completely fixed? I'm not too sure about. Any other questions? No? Yes. No.
Well, not a question, but a comment.
Mhm.
Kind of relating this to gambling.
Mhm.
If you was to ask ChatGPT on like a betting skin, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Who is Jason gonna score this amount of points?
Mhm.
It's really unpredictable what ChatGPT is going to say because it's
Yes.
subjective.
Yes. And even if you were simulating a game like these fantasy sports,
Yeah.
you know that there's a certain completion for football or, you know, um, all those other statistics, but the probability might work out that they perform horribly, right? You have a quote unquote off day. But like you said, doesn't know, right? When you have probability, there's no one way things can play out. And you might have a situation where things play out perfectly badly or things play out perfectly well, right? So, absolutely. So, they understand patterns and they take you literally. So, they don't understand sarcasm, right? Not at all. And subjectivity is a really hard problem. So when you are inputting something, being general or ambiguous is the enemy of good output. If you're general, tell me about dogs, then it's going to tell you about dogs and it's just going to pick what the easiest thing to pick is. It could be randomly picking something from the large number of alternatives, or it could be something that you just didn't want, right? So you want to make sure that you provide clarity, and that clarity can be general, getting to more specific, but the more background you can provide it, the better that response will be appropriate to what it is you're trying to get out of it. And so less guesswork gives you better answers. And so when you give it clear instructions, it's going to stop it from guessing because it literally does guess. So that analogy or that example, tell me about dogs versus what dogs are good around children. The latter, what dogs are good around children, will give you a more appropriate answer because you don't want an aggressive dog that doesn't like children. A more appropriate answer than just tell me about dogs, which is more ambiguous. There are many different meanings that you can have in responses to the tell me about dogs. Does that make sense? Any questions? No questions? All right. And so shaping the model, keep AI focused. You have this big probability table, and you basically want to tell it, forget about all this stuff. Look here. And that look here, you use words to do that. So a good prompt helps it pick the right information. And you also want to make sure you're clear about the style of that output that you want from it. And you want to keep it focused on the goal. And this Croft-C framework is one of the ways, at least in the book, that they recommend you can do that. And so this idea, is it the only way to do it? Absolutely not. But it's something that's repeatable. You can say, let me define a process for how I interact with this thing in a way that I can get the outputs that I want out of it. And I tried it with the Strait of Hormuz and I actually learned some stuff. Well, it's pretty interesting. So you don't want it to wander around aimlessly through this big space of probabilities. You want it to focus on one part of this vast model. Okay. And so one of the things you can do is shape the style and the length. You might want to say, this is for a novice audience. This is for an intermediate audience with some knowledge, or this is for an expert knowledge. You wouldn't go to physicists and say, gravity makes things fall to the ground, right? That's what you do for a novice crowd. You would talk to physicists appropriate to the type of language and knowledge they might have about the subject. You want to choose the style appropriate for the level of audience you're trying to produce your work for. Now, of course, if there's something that I have no experience in, I'm going to choose the novice and I'll say, okay, tell me a little bit more about this fall to the ground. Okay. How does that happen? Okay. Well, tell me about this subject. And you can actually tell it, given the novice view, to drive down a little bit more a little bit more expert in steps until you build the background to become an expert in something, right? So you can shape how the style is and use that to your advantage for topics that you might not already know right now. And I do that all the time for various things. Okay. Then, in terms of the style, you could say, I want it to be agreeable. Maybe you're taking a class where you have to debate a topic. So, if you're doing that, you would present your viewpoint and you'd say, I want you to argue against this viewpoint, but I want you to be very adversarial. I want you to really go at me because I want to get examples of how someone might be very, very gruff or very aggressive in counteracting what I have to say. So you can tell this thing to be very agreeable with what you're saying, to be skeptical, I don't know about this thing, or really adversarial. And that can have its purposes, particularly when you're using it to learn new material or maybe prepping for discussion or debate or just thinking of different arguments for or against stuff. Does that make sense? So when you say, I want you to be aggressive or I want you to be skeptical, again, you're focusing in on a particular part of different combinations of language because agreeable language doesn't use the same combination of words as aggressive language or skeptical language. Does that make sense? Okay. And so you can also tell it things about the length. I want you to keep it short and sweet, short summary, or give me this multi-page, 20-page treatise that's discussing every little molecule of this thing. There are places for both of them. If you're giving a high level pitch, you want this short summary. If you really want to study the details of gravity makes things fall to the ground, you say, give me the long detailed analysis. And it'll tell you about the history of gravity, the experiments from hundreds of years ago up till right about now, all of that stuff. Does that make sense? All right. Yes. Mario.
AI that is created in different languages function differently than English.
Mm. AI models, the big ones, like Gemini from Google, ChatGPT from OpenAI, and um, uh, Claude from Anthropic, they're using different languages all together. And if they use everything. In fact, right now, you could have it translate for you. And depending on, the style, you could probably have it translate, English to X language, right? Now, of course, you know, languages like some of the Native American ones like Ojibwa, If it doesn't have a lot of examples, it's probably not going to be very good. But it is right now training on multiple languages and can do pretty good translation for you right now. Any other questions? No? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Hmm.
A whole precinct and then
Mhm.
summarize it, like four.
So if you output all these different cases, which is public record, I'm sure somebody's doing that right now, right? It's too valuable not to, because the lawyers can only search so much case law, right? Or, usually the ones with a little more gray hair that understand, oh, I remember back in 80 something, this happened, blah, blah, blah. So you can ingest all of that stuff and now ask it questions about what the law, provide me some cases that support this aspect and blah, 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 blah.
That was what I was thinking when you mentioned that you can ask AI to be aggressive in the argument.
Mhm.
If I had a big case that
Mhm.
want to destroy the district,
Mhm.
that's exactly what I'm going to ask.
Absolutely. And I promise you, we don't know the name of the company, but I promise you someone's doing it right now because it's too much monetization and opportunity for someone not to. I just don't know who they are, but I'm sure it's happening now. Show me an example in this jurisdiction where this happened. And then they can find all these supporting cases to try to find, arguments against a viewpoint.
So writing the brief.
Absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And moreover, you could say, given a certain jurist, they have a certain history. So you could, with enough cases, say, find people who are similar and then try to use that to argue best against or for that particular jurist in front of that jurist. Absolutely. And I'm pretty sure, I just don't know who it is, someone's doing that now because it's just too, I won't say obvious, it's too important of a problem for someone not to do it. And then if you think about it, you have somebody who knows some law. It doesn't even have to be a lawyer, it could be a paralegal. And then you have someone who knows a lot of data and AI. Now, all of a sudden, you have a company and you can sell this stuff to all the law offices or what have you. Okay.
Yeah, you just explained a few cases where human beings can monetize themselves on AI.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But with those few cases that you just explained,
Mhm.
you think it's gonna justify, or do you think they're going to receive, or the companies will receive a return on investment of the billions of dollars that they're spending on data centers?
Ah.
Some people revenue is gonna increase,
Mhm.
but for the amount of money that they're spending.
I see. Um, I think it's also, you can think of it lanes of revenue, right? Now, the infrastructure folks, they always said, someone told me a long time ago, is that the people who make the most money in this world are the people who move things and they collect a small fee every time they move stuff. They can move goods, transport, and logistics. They can move data. They can move calculations. So if you think about the data centers, they're just moving data and calculations, and they collect a small fee every time they do that. Now, with these lanes of revenue, you have this legal reasoning lane. There are already people in the medical industry looking at medical reasoning. You have all of these medical records. You ask it questions about stuff, right? And so you're absolutely right. How do you monetize it? But I think the folks who run the infrastructure, the data centers, they're always going to collect their fee, right? And then you have the people who make the applications, they're going to collect their fee. And at the end of it all, different people make different things. And then the folks who sell the application, they're going to collect their fee. And then the law office, they're just going to say, we did discovery. They just looked inside asked the model some stuff in this specially trained legal GPT, and they still charge you billable hours, 15-minute units, right? So,
That'd be the agent that was talking about.
yes,
They create an agent.
yes, you create an agent for that.
Then that's what some people are selling as subscriptions out there. Like,
Mhm.
oh, subscribe to my agent. And
Yes.
get all this data,
Yes.
whether it's stock or whether it's,
And the one disclaimer is that you say it's a tool. You never base your decision on what it outputs. You use it to help inform you so you make the decision. You own the decision as a human being.
So if that wanted to create an agent that focuses on something he wanted specific in stocks or a specific stock, and he can sell that. So
You could sell it. Stock market is a little bit different because it's so turbulent, but what you can do is use it to make recommendations that this is a good stock to buy or recognize patterns in the stock market, which they do now. Mhm.
Support.
Yes.
You wouldn't be wrong because.
Yes. Well, in investments, they say that disclaimer, past performance is not a guarantee of future return, right? So you always want to have that disclaimer. You use the output of the tool to make your judgment. And your judgment could be right, it could be wrong, but you never say the tool's going to make the decision for you, because that's a dangerous thing as well. Any other questions? No. All right. So let me fast forward a little bit because we're almost at break. Be specific, be explicit, break down complex tasks, and don't be ambiguous in your language. Be very specific. If you get it wrong, you can always revisit it. And this is the Cross-C framework. Let me see if, yeah. And it runs through all the different aspects of your prompt that you are recommended to use. This isn't the only way to do it. But the nice thing by having a particular process or way of doing it, inputting it, it's repeatable, right? And you can get it to shape down into a response that is appropriate. So one example they give you in the book, and there are many examples, give me some, let's say you're in marketing or advertising, give me some taglines or catchy statements about a coffee cup. Maybe you're designing a coffee cup. And so instead of that, right, that's very general, you say, okay, we're a small startup and we're creating a new eco-friendly coffee cup. Maybe it's a paper cup or cup made out of starch, right? Some people do that because it's biodegradable. Your role is to persuade a marketing copywriter specializing in such products. And the objective is to generate 3 taglines. So you're telling it what it is specifically you want out of it for the new cup. Form them as a numbered list, the first one, the second one, the third one. The tone should be upbeat and inspiring and a little playful, right? And so you get the sense here, it's telling you what you want, the background information, what the persona should be friendly, upbeat, etc. Avoid overly technical terms. So you're not going to talk about half-life and how it degrades and enzymes and stuff like that. You don't want to use technical jargon for this coffee cup design that they're talking about. And so this is just one example, and it's going to take time because thinking about this Cross-C framework, all of these points, context, role, objective, form, tone, conditions, it's kind of hard to think about things in that way. But if you get it wrong, you can always change it if you don't like the output that it's giving you. And it's not a matter of getting it wrong. It's about this sort of dance, if you will, feeling out the model to try to say, okay, maybe that tone was too friendly, right? Make it a little bit more muted instead of like Disney, right? So to speak. So you can always revisit and revise your interaction with it. So help your AI focus. And the AI deals with various components, and I won't talk about that in the interest of time, representing words, recognizing patterns, generating output, but you need things that are well structured. Also, when you're efficient, if you're dealing with something that is current, it's kind of nice to have a little bit of history about it. And what you find with the Strait of Hormuz, by prompting it, and I have some prompts that I had tried out, I can show you, prompting it to look at the history of US-Iran relations provides you a good context leading up to what's happening right now. Does that make sense? So providing background and context supports focusing that model on different aspects of this enormous probability table so it can better produce the types of outputs that you're after. And so when you rely on a shared context, we all know what warm means, or some sort of cultural understanding. AI doesn't know that. It only has 20 trillion documents, a bunch of words, a bunch of images, and so forth. You have to state things directly. You can't hint at things, only 20 trillion, but it's just words. If you think about, let's say, from the time you were born till now, everything you see images in high def, right? It can't match, high def now can't match what you see, right? Um, 30 pictures a second, every day, every hour of your life. You could not store that right now, just over 10 years. That's a lot of data. So if you think about the experience that you have, Even 20 trillion documents is nothing compared to that, right? The sounds that you hear, the sensations that you feel. Think about what happens with an infant. Once they're mobile and they start crawling and walking around, that's a hell of a lot of data. 20 trillion documents is nothing compared to that, just even for the first 10 years of your life, right? So if you think about the amount of data, yeah, it's just words and images and stuff like that, but it still doesn't match a human being's experience in the real world. And just looking at cameras as what you see, it's not even what you taste, what you feel, your knowledge about stuff, the relationships that you form between things. So it's trying, yeah. It does its thing and it's useful, but it's just really good at recognizing a lot of patterns that you wouldn't have thought about from that data that it does have, right? And that's what makes it efficient. Absolutely. Not only the memory, but this idea of culture. For generations, you didn't learn things from scratch. Your parents, grandparents, ancestors said, this is useful. Let me teach it to you. So you didn't have to learn that on your own. It was kind of given to you. So things like agriculture, right? We didn't have to hunt and gather anymore. We raised crops and we raised animals. So that gave you a lot more time to do other stuff. So it's not even just what you think in your lifetime, it's what your ancestors thought in their lifetime. So this is over multiple lifetimes being passed down, and each generation takes it. Some things drop out that are not quote unquote useful, new things arise, and then existing things sometimes are changed or sometimes they're just used as they were given. So, yes, you're absolutely right. But it's not only just your thoughts, it's the thoughts that were passed down generation to generation to generation. So that's really powerful when you add the cultural part. Yes, all right.
So you're telling me that AI does the same thing we do with collective, um, yeah, with the collective knowledge.
It doesn't do collective knowledge. It's just the data that you input. It's the raw data. So there's no notion of this AI model from this period of time. It was passed to this other one. There's no notion of that. It's just the more data that you've given it. You give it more data, it'll find patterns, right? But this idea of culture is not a thing for AI. Okay. Any questions? No? All right. So let me end with that. And the idea here was to talk about layering. When you build a house, you put down the foundation and then you put up the framing. You have this rough idea of what something is, and then you fill in more details. And that's how your prompts should arise in time. So let me there's some examples of prompt engineering. Let me go to the end here, and I'll leave that slide up, and we can take our break now. We're at the halfway point. I'm sorry, I love all the questions too. This is awesome. So we can take a break, and then we come back. I'll show you some of my prompts. I don't know how it'll be on Copilot. I did it on a different one, so we'll see how it plays out with this Croft C framework. Okay. Okay, so up above, I have Copilot, and down below, I have some prompts that I've actually written. And this is to use that approach described in the book about how to structure prompts. And so in this, I tell it first, I'm writing a storyline about how we got to the current times with the Iran conflict and how the Strait of Hormuz became so important. I will input links to articles that provide background information. And so I'm telling it some background about what I want out of it, but I'm going to give it some history. And that history I'm going to give it is going to be stuff that I've Google searched before. So I Google search for US-Iran conflict history between the US and Iran. And so let me first copy this prompt, and I'm going to put it into Copilot, and I'm going to see what it says. Now, I did this in a different language models before this. So it said, okay, I'll use your links. So it said, okay, well, give me this information in the links. And so there were a couple links that I found, and this talks about the long-term relationship between the US and Iran, which I didn't know. I mean, we were on friendly terms back like 100 years ago, really friendly terms. And so that provides long-term history. And so I Google searched US-Iran relations, and it gave me some links. So I input the first link, and Copilot's going to go off and read all the information available on this link. While it's doing that, let me paste the link here. And all I did literally was a Google search, US-Iran relations. And so here it talks about decades of hostility between Iran and US were preceded by a little remembered century-long friendship. I'm like, oh,
So do you have to? Story?
ah,
Be able to process that data into the
mhm,
request that you're asking them to do?
absolutely. So I started out, I said, US-Iran relations. And I did that, and I browsed around and I found some articles, and then I copied the link for that article, and that's what I have as some of the stuff from here. And so I took one from this source, one from that source, and this other one, Al Jazeera, is an Arab news source. So I said, all right, let me take a news source that's not a US site. Let me take a news source that's overseas, because maybe they might have a different perspective in their article.
Did you do BBC?
I saw that one, but I didn't use that one. And this is just to say, you give it a bunch of information. So if I copied this link from Al Jazeera, I go into Copilot, I give it another piece of information, and then you give it another piece of information and another piece of information to provide context and background. And what that's doing underneath the covers is that it's telling the language model not just the history, but it's causing it to focus on different aspects of this huge, enormous model underneath the covers. So then when I do that, let me input this third link that I had just to try to make it reproducible from what I did earlier. I'll give it the third link, and now working on a response. Okay, so nope, it's still thinking. All right. So when I give it the third source, okay, it digests that. And then this is where I have a persona. I'm a college student learning how to use AI and have an assignment to write about the Strait of Hormuz. So now I'm setting a little bit more context. I've given it information, given it background, and I said, act like it's a college student. That's the audience I want. I don't want to act like an expert who knows all the history and stuff like that. So then I give it that, hit enter, working on a response. And it'll summarize and read the articles and stuff like that. But what is really important part is the persona and the shaping of the model that's happening. So I said I'm a college student, right? Thanks for explaining the context. I'll treat it as academic help. Now I said, this is what I want. I'd like to make an article outlining the history leading up to Hormuz becoming so important, because I don't know why it's important. Given this context, tell me about the history, about, I guess, how they discovered oil, what type of setup they have, and stuff like that. Mhm. And then I want to make sure it's neutral. I don't want it to seem like a conservative, like a liberal. Just give me a neutral viewpoint. So I'm shaping the tone as well. So I do that. Okay. I'd like to maintain an article outlining the history. I'd like to make the factual story that is neutral, meaning does not adopt US conservative or US liberal policy.
That to like trade and purchase.
Mhm. It goes way back, and the discovery of oil in Persia in particular. So the goal, now I'm telling it the format, is to have a list of key dates. Each will have a handful of sentences, don't make it too long, discussing the significance of those dates. Why are these key dates in time important? So now I'm telling it more about what I want, right? Because it'll just output lots and lots of stuff based on that context. So still working on a response. Okay, hit enter. So now this is what I want. Okay, so now, okay, neutral timeline, and now it has early 1900s, discovery of oil in Iran, 50s, early 50s, nationalization of Iranian oil industry, the creation of OPEC in 1960, right? So now I say, okay, the tone should be serious. What I mean is that it has information that connects the importance of Hormuz with the US economy. Now I'm further shaping what I want out of it. So I do that. And let me say, okay. Um, that's a good question. I don't know all the details. I don't know all the details. Um, yeah, they might break it. They might. So now, and I said, connect Hormuz with the US economy, right? How does it impact the US economy? And now I say, you know what? I don't need all this paragraph information. I'd like to have no more than 10 key dates or rough periods of time. And each one of these key dates, these 10 of them, should highlight the impact of Hormuz on the US economy.
I'm gonna do that personally on Saddam Hussein.
No, no. That's an interesting history because what I do know about Afghanistan is that during the Russian-Afghanistan war, it was the US who supplied arms to the Taliban. Hmm.
He reconstructed Afghanistan.
Yeah, he had the money. He had the money. His father, his grandfather, they built all them structure. All
So-
the buildings in there was built by his family. So they had the money.
So I have 10 key dates. I think, did I do that one? 10 dates. All right. So I said limit the dates that it has to 10 of them. So it has 9 key dates or periods. So now I'm saying reduce it to periods of time and only have 10 of them, no more than 10. For each period, create a picture, right? So I gave it all this text, context. Now create an image that represents each period of time. And one of them is the 1970 oil embargo, right? I remember that when I was a little kid, right? So for each period of time, create a picture. And so now Copilot certainly will take a lot more time, but it's going to look at all sorts of news article pictures, all sorts of others, and choose what it thinks is the appropriate picture for that particular period of time. So now I went back, and the last thing I did, can you show me all the prompts that I inputted? And that's what you're seeing here, this document that I'm cutting and pasting. And so at the end of it, and it's going to take a little bit longer because generating images is a lot more complex than just generating text. So both. It's creating images based on the context I provided it, and I've told it for each of these periods of time, no more of 10, that connect Strait of Hormuz to the US economy, create a picture that you think is appropriate for that period of time.
AI is gonna have an effect on humanity. Like, what's the side effects of AI on humanity?
Well,
From now.
For this, I didn't have to think about it, right? So I didn't have to go off, I didn't have to go off and study it. I just typed some prompts. But if I were kind of doing this for real, meaning like to actually produce a report or something, I would go off and I'd now start to take these periods of time and look at stuff for myself instead of just trusting the output.
Like, have a professor, as long as you're doing professor, can you immediately pick out, like, if you ask somebody to do an assignment, that's their own writing versus.
That's a good question. I have no way of knowing, but I do take submissions, and if over a semester, you kind of get to know somebody's work. And so some work, I'm like, there's no way that this person could have produced this on their own. There's no way. So I'll look at it, and then you have different ways of assessing. You have the project work, you have written exams, and if things don't match up, if you are lighting it up on the projects and the exam is closed book, closed notes, and I ask you the same stuff that you lit it up on the projects. And if you completely bomb the exam, might be something going on, especially the types of questions I ask. I don't ask you to repeat stuff that you've memorized. I paint a scenario and then I ask you questions about the scenario and I measure based on what you use to answer the scenario. It could be 10, 20 different things. based on your understanding of those things, that's how I measure your mastery of the material. So almost like tell me a story by choosing certain things. And it's the choice you make and the true things you say about that set of choices that shows.
So like for a better comparison,
Mhm.
it's basically like a math teacher letting you use a calculator versus not letting you use a calculator and you having to work out your arithmetic. It's
Yes.
kind of the same
Yes.
logic
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
the AI
Yes.
and inputting
Mhm.
information.
Yes. And I wouldn't just say, here's some arithmetic. I would tell you a story about somebody going to the store and buying something, and that something costs so much, and they start out with this much in their wallet. How much change are they getting back?
Mhm.
Can he afford to buy 2 apples and a pound of grapes if this is the cost per pound?
So you
So
just
I,
made it hard because you just took the math and blended it with the minutes.
yeah, but if you can use it, then you understand it.
You're right.
I'm not going to say what's 2 + 3, or, I'm going to paint a scenario where you have to use it. And so it's what you use that shows your mastery. So I make it harder to shortcut, harder to, I wouldn't say cheat. It's harder to shortcut. Yeah, cheat proof. I try, but it's harder to grade, right? It takes longer to grade, but you know. So here's my timeline. It's numbered 1908 to 1920, discovery of oil in the Persian Gulf. So now I could say, tell me more about the first point, the first period of time, right? I can follow up. I can say, find an image for me that represents that. I can.
250-word explanation.
Mhm.
That
Yes.
times New Roman
Yes.
double space.
Yes.
They're gonna shoot
Mhm.
the page out.
Yes. And then you can ask it questions. Um, what industries are most impacted in the US by the Strait of Hormuz? And you have this timeline, you have the summary, you can ask it, how does this impact my life, right? Given this background. And it's not so much about the summary, it's about focusing the AI model on the right things in order to focus on the right information to give you the most appropriate outputs, right? But here it is. You could learn about the Strait of Hormuz, why it's important to the US economy, and what's going on. And this timeline, periods of time, creation of OPEC, the global oil crisis, Iranian revolution, the Iran-Iraq war, um, Iran naval confrontations, globalization of oil markets on the finance side, and at the present economic risk, right? So given these summary topics, you can always say, tell me more about number 9, right? And then it'll tell you the long view, but you can use it to organize topics and see how things progress in time to answer the question about how did we get here today and how does it impact my life, right? And so this is all about not necessarily the Strait of Hormuz. That's just an example, but it's really about how you structure your interaction with the AI model to get information out of it that's appropriate and useful for your purposes. And that's what this is all about. Okay. And you could do this with any subject. We're just using contemporary topic just because, it's in the news. Yeah. Yeah. So any questions? No? All right. So I'm going to end here, stop the recording. Hopefully this is helpful. Please read through the book. They describe this stuff, but I've just given more of a summary. But try it out. You'd be very surprised at how well it can work, but you have to ask it the right question.